Table saw sleds, what are they and what do they do? Today I'm going to explain that to you. Table saw sleds add to the functionality of a table saw beyond what the manufacturer supplies you with the equipment to do. Not only do they expand the functionality, but they do it safely, which is very important. Today I'm going to show you a couple of different table saw sleds, explain them, go over what they can do for you, and maybe you would want to make one or buy one of your own. Hi everybody, I'm Jim Dierdorf and this is Detroit DIY. Let's get started. Table saws are intended to do rip cuts on dimensional lumber or to break down sheet goods. With the use of the miter gauge, they can do some light duty cross cutting more easily with shorter pieces of wood. Sleds can expand everything that a table saw can do in a very safe manner. Not only that, but there's many different types of table saw sleds. Some of these sleds can be purchased and most of them can be made. So it's however you want to do it. If you're handy in the shop and you want to make some sleds, then that's the way to go. I have two table saw sleds and we're going to go over both of them today, why I made them and what they can do for me and what they can do for you. This is the miter gauge that came with my saw. You can buy other much more elaborate miter gauges to use with your table saw than what this is. But the miter gauge that comes with, or the additional one that you buy that's better than these, will enable you to do cross cuts on your table saw. But the cross cutting you can do with these is limited because it becomes cumbersome. Let me show you what I mean. What I have here is about a 5-foot long piece of red cedar. And to do cross cuts on this with your miter gauge would be slightly cumbersome. It wouldn't be impossible, but it would be cumbersome. Now I've added this little board here to my miter gauge to help stabilize things. Without that, it would even be worse. But with a sled, we can make this job a whole lot easier and a lot more accurate. Let me show you the first sled we're going to be talking about. This is a sled that I built a few years back. This sled uses, with these strips of wood, both of the miter slots in the top of my table saw. And not all sleds use both slots. Some sleds use one. Some sleds utilize the fence. Some sleds utilize the structure or the top of the fence and both sides to cut angles on taller panels. I do not have a sled like that, but I will be building one in the future, so if you're interested in that, watch out for that video. But this sled uses both miter slots. Basically what it does is it sits down on the table saw and it sits into those slots. Now it allows you the ability to slide it back and forth. This sled has furniture paste wax on the bottom of it to help it slide better on top of the table and keep it from binding. Now what this will allow me to do is cross cut bigger pieces of wood. This will also allow me to cut a 45 on the ends of the pieces of the wood. Not necessarily a miter, but a 45 on the end. So now, as you can see, when I put this piece of cedar in here, it is much more stable across the whole width of this fence. Not only that, it will allow me very easily to feed it through the blade. So now, whether I wanted to cut 20 inches off of this or 4 inches off of this, I have a very stable method of feeding this board through the saw. Let's cut 4 inches off and I'll show you what I mean. So I've got me a mark right here at 4 inches, and I'm just going to line that up with the inside edge. This is going to be exactly where my blade's going to cut it, and it's going to leave me with a 4-inch piece of material. And just that easy, it's done. So using this sled, it could take the place of my miter saw. I didn't build this to take the place of my miter saw, and I could easily cut this 4-inch material in my miter saw. However, my miter saw is a chop type miter saw, and it will cut about 6.5 inches. So when it comes to anything more than that, I cannot cross cut that in my miter saw. I could flip it and do 6 and 6, but you don't always get anything very accurate that way. And that was the whole reason I built this particular sled, was to cross cut larger boards. So what we have here is a 1x12 of pine. I cannot cross cut this in my miter saw. I can get about halfway through it, flip it around, do the other half. There's no accuracy like that. On this sled, I can cross cut this all day long. In fact, this edge was just cut with my circular saw. It's not straight. I didn't intend it to be straight. I just wanted to get this into a workable size piece for a project that's up and coming. And just like that, I have a nice straight edge. The other function of this sled is that it can cut a 45 on the end of these longer boards. Once again, something that my miter saw cannot do. Let me show you what I mean. So with my blade angled at 45 degrees, we're going to cut a 45 on here. Now we're going to have to raise the blade up some because it's not going to get through. And you'll notice I still have my riving knife in place, and that's important to me. I want that riving knife there to help prevent any kickback. Sleds won't prevent kickback. And there we have it, a very nice 45-degree cut. It's straight, it's accurate, and it's everything that you would want it to be for a woodworking project. Those are the two basic functions of this sled. Let's take a look at the other one. This sled is designed to be used with dovetail clamps. I've taken my router and I've cut these dovetails at every 4 inches throughout this sled so that I can use this type of clamp to fit in here. These clamps are made by Micro Jig, and they slide into these slots, and then you can clamp your material into place no matter what thickness it is, all the way up to about 8 inches. More than the table saw could cut. I do have a video on making this sled. I'm going to put a link right up above here. You can click on if you'd like to watch that. The other sled I just used, I've had that for a long time, well before I had the YouTube channel, so I do not have a video on making that, and maybe some future content. This sled also uses the miter slot, but it only uses one miter slot. This fence could also be made without this, but just to run it up against the fence, provided both sides are straight. So you could slide it through with your workpiece clamped to it, just like it was a piece of wood itself. This sled also has the paste wax on the bottom of it to help it slide easily through the saw. Let's take a look at how this one works. This sled has a different purpose than the cross-cutting sled that I just showed you. This sled I would be using for jointing and for cutting tapers. I made this one a little smaller because I had a smaller project that I wanted to do with some smaller jointing and then glue ups, and to get that nice straight edge for the glue up I needed this because I don't have a jointer, and this works perfectly. Let me show you. So the edge of this sled is perfect to the inside of my blade. So if I do any jointing, we're going to just cut a nice edge on this piece of scrap right here. We're just going to let it overhang the edge very slightly so that all the blade is going to do is straighten that edge up and make it perfect for a glue up. We're going to take our dovetail clamps and we're going to slide them into place. And we're going to make sure that they don't stick out so far. This one's giving fighting. There we go. With that one in place, we're going to go ahead and snug it down. I'll show you what to watch out for once we get it fully clamped into place. Scoot this side over just a little. And it doesn't matter how much we take off because we're only going to use this process on one side of the board. On the other side of the board, we will be running it through the table saw with the side we just jointed against the fence to get the other side nice and straight. When you're using a sled like this with the dovetail clamps, you just want to make sure that the clamp isn't protruding from the sled so that the blade gets it. Now with that clamped in there, we're ready to go. I like to put a little X on the side of the board that I'm jointing just so I know which side it is without having to look it over that well. Now what we have is a perfectly straight edge on this board. And that edge is suitable for a glue up or anything else that you may want to do with it. The next purpose for this jig is to cut angles. So typically you cannot cut a taper or an angle, a tapered angle, on a table saw without a jig. So per se you wanted to make a table leg that was 3/4 of an inch at the bottom but yet have a 1 inch by 1 inch or a 2 inch by 2 inch square at the top. You could do that with this jig. And what we would do is we would set the board in here on an angle. I'm not going to measure anything out or specify anything. We don't want the saw blade to start cutting into it here because we would want X amount of material to be square at the top. So we're just going to lock it in right here. And right here. Remember, this is just a demonstration. We're not making anything. Let's cut it off. So now, this is what we have, a nice tapered angle on this piece of wood. And you can't do that in a table saw any other way unless you have a sled that allows you to cut that taper on there. So as you can see, a sled expands the functionality of a table saw. And that is exactly what you want to do. You want to get the most out of this tool that you can, and sleds just help you do that. None of these sleds are hard to build, they just take a little bit of time. And what they can do for you is limitless. So if you just want to cross-cut wide boards or if you want to cut tapers, a sled is the way to go. That's all we got for this time. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider doing so. If you have any questions or comments, Please leave them down in the comment section and I will give you an answer as promptly as I can. Thank you for watching, and remember to always respect the power of your power tools. We'll see you soon.